Mary? Thank you.
You didn't write. Not a word. Couldn't sit still another night, wondering if he was still.
I'm still here.
His children asked when you're coming home. I told them soon, but they're getting old enough to know when their mother is lying.
Tell them I'll come home when this is over.
When's that, John? When every man with a crown on his button is gone?
A man can speak his mind without bowing first. And the laws come from the ground he stands on, and not a throne he'll never see.
What if the ground swallows you first?
Then our children grow up knowing their father stood for something more than his own safety.
I liked when all we had to worry about was our farm and our family. Now you talk like a man twice your age.
War does that. Makes a man older before he's earned it. Remember that spring by the river, when we planted the first corn?
How could I forget? It flooded a week later.
We planted again, because it was ours. That's what this is, Mary. Planting again, even if the ground's uncertain.
If you forget who you are, this will remind you.
They did this?
They wanted you to have it. Said it might keep you safe.
Just might.
I should go.
If I don't come home,
Don't finish that.
tell them where I stayed.
You'd best make sure I don't have to.
For them.
February 1776, a significant time in American history and North Carolina history.
All through our history, American citizens have had to make choices as to what this country's going to be. Freedom definitely is not free, and every generation is called on to decide what they stand for.
When the war broke out with Lexington and Concord in April of 1775, of course, it took weeks for all the colonies to be alerted. North Carolina didn't learn about it until early May. Josiah Martin, now fearing for his life, not wanting to lose his colony, traveled to Fort Johnston at the mouth of the Kaifia River.
So really, what would end up being called the Moores Creek Campaign actually starts, and the purpose for it starts back in July of 1775. When Patriots from Wilmington, Brunswick, even Blaine County burned His Majesty's fort at Fort Johnston. Thus, arguably, you could say North Carolina at that moment on July 19, 1775, became the first colony to physically expel their governor.
And he comes up with a plan. And he contacts London and he pitches it to him. He says, how about we call all of those Highlanders up, Get them to march to the coast. We'll link them up with British regulars, and then we'll start marching through the Carolinas, and we'll take back territory, and we'll keep going north, and eventually George Washington and that bunch of rabble Continentals of his are going to be facing a British army from the south and one coming down from the north, and we'll wrap up this whole rebellion thing toot sweet.
So why did the king, and King George had to approve of these major military operations, why did King George III approve Josiah Martin's plan instead of Lord Dunmore's in Virginia and William Campbell's in South Carolina? Because Patriot forces on July 19, 1775, advanced on Fort Johnston and burned it to the ground.
And this would infuriate not just Josiah Martin, the royal governor, it would infuriate the British military. It would go all the way up to the king.
They destroyed the property of the king, but they'd gotten away with their challenge to the Stamp Act 10 years earlier. And now they've upped the ante and they have destroyed the king's property. Will the crown respond? They couldn't respond at the time because Josiah Martin's taking refuge on board the only British warship on station at the Cape Fear called the Cruiser. There were only a dozen provincial garrison troops. They weren't going to fight back against these 500 to 800 angry men who have just torched the fort. So King George III approved of that, of Josiah Martin's proposal, as payback for what the Patriots did to his fort. And that's what leads to the Battle of Morris Creek Bridge. You don't hear other historians talk about that, but that's what led to Morris Creek Bridge.
This whole conflict really was about liberty. At this point, we're still early on in the American Revolution. We're still pre-July 4th, 1776. And at this point, people are still just talking about how do we contain tyranny? How do we push back against the tyranny of the king? Some people are talking about, absolute independence and separating from England entirely. But a lot of these people simply thought that they had natural-born rights, the rights that John Locke talks about, life, liberty, and property. And they felt that the crown was taking away those rights from them, and they wanted to stand up for that. And that's why these people joined these militias from all over North Carolina.
So the militia were everywhere. All the counties had their own militias. Sometimes a certain precinct would have a militia. Big towns like Wilmington would have a militia. Even Brunswick would have a militia.
Every one of us would have been in the militia, even African Americans. Until 1793, African Americans served in the military too.
There's really two primary accounts out there dealing with Morris Creek. Both of them are Loyalist accounts.
People like Richard Caswell with the New Bern Militia and Alexander Lillington of the Wilmington District Militia, and informs them that you guys are going to have to make the stand first because it's going to be several days before I can get there. And so with that in mind, Lillington arrives on scene first. He begins fortifying the battlefield. Caswell arrives a day later and takes overall command because his commission supersedes Lillington's. And they're sitting here waiting for MacDonald and the Highlanders in February of 1776. McLeod and all the rest of them believed that it would be a militia force, and militia force had a reputation for not standing. And they didn't think much of the martial prowess of the colonials anyway. And so McLeod gave in to them.
Colonel? If the governor's men make it to the mouth of the river, meet up with Clinton's fleet, it's over. It's back to the king's province.
Yes, but if they can't cross the bridge, then we must ensure that this is the place where their march ends. We've cut the planks, left the rails. The soap and tallow go on before dawn.
You've been tracing that bridge for an hour.
I'm not tracing it. I'm imagining the ways that it fails us.
And?
It fails that they don't come. It fails that they come too fast. It fails that they come too slow and the dawn sees them clearly. which leaves us with only one acceptable version of events.
You're assuming they think like you.
No, I'm assuming that they think like soldiers who are tired, wet, and running out of roads.
McLeod is not reckless.
But he's desperate, and that's worse.
1,000 men guarding a bridge. Strange, is it not? I'm used to marching lines and banners.
Not tonight. Tonight it's patience. Whoever fires first wins. It's a matter of strategy at this point.
Sir, but what if they don't come?
And we freeze for nothing, and I'll thank Providence for the mercy.
Scout reports Caswell's in front of us. Not moving, but waiting.
Doesn't have the numbers to do much else.
He has enough to slow us down.
These rebels aren't fit for an army such as ours. And Martin can't have us waiting around.
Martin isn't here. The men are tired, Donald. Some of them have been marching for weeks. They're soaked through. Powder's starting to clump.
I know.
Then you also know another night in this weather does to morale.
Aye, that's when you start to wonder why you're marching at all.
This bridge, it narrows us, forces us into a column. If Caswell has even a modest position on the far bank...
Then he's counting on us, deciding it's not worth the risk.
Or he's counting on daylight.
If he were planning to fight us properly, he'd want to see us. He'd want his men steady, guns dry. Look, Martin expects us to be moving. Every hour we linger, the rebels gain confidence. And confidence, my friend, spreads faster than word ever did.
You carry the governor's impatience as though it's your own.
I'm carrying the responsibility he handed me.
Responsibility doesn't require haste. Caswell's not reckless. He's been a soldier long enough to know which ground favors him. You're speaking as though you know which version of him we'll find.
I know the kind of man who digs and waits. He believes patience wins battles.
Sometimes it does.
Not when the other side understands urgency.
You're confident.
I'm committed.
Interesting. Confidence listens for reasons to stop. Commitment listens for reasons to go. If we start marching now, we'll get there before dawn. You're convinced Caswell will pull back.
I'm convinced he'll do what seems reasonable when faced with a determined column in poor light.
Laddie.
Sir?
Are you tired?
Aye, sir. We're tired. But it's the sort of tired you get when you've already decided you're not stopping. Once you've gone far enough, resting starts to feel like another kind of work.
How long have you been awake, son?
Lost count somewhere south of Cross Creek.
You've heard the scouts report.
Aye. He swears Caswell's camped on the west bank.
No entrenchments east of the creek.
None he saw. Just fires, tents, men thinking they already won the ground.
You're convinced he's exposed.
I'm convinced he's not expecting us to move like this.
Sir, the men believe this is the moment. They think Caswell's cornered himself. If we wait, that certainty starts to thin.
That will be all.
I'll wake the officers.
Quietly. We move before dawn.
Aye.
So on that morning, they make their way from 6 miles off. They leave at about 2 o'clock in the morning. By the time they get here, it's very early in the morning, 5, 6 o'clock or so. If you've been here on this battleground in February, it's very easy to see what they would have been facing, because usually the air is cooler than the water is, or vice versa. Anyway, you have fog, right? And it's very hard to see. And while they knew generally where the bridge was,
McLeod convinces them that, look, Caswell has abandoned his camp, and so hurriedly that he's left his campfires burning. We've got him on the run. So if we push forward, we can overtake their rear guard and scatter them and defeat them. And then the way to Brunswicktown is open.
Going into the battle, as the Loyalists approached, they at first thought Caswell and his army were on that side of the bridge. They decided to attack in the dark. And as they got within about 400 yards, they realized that the camp was abandoned and that Caswell had come across the creek.
Some of McLeod's scouts have discovered Moore's Creek Bridge, but the Patriots have pulled up the planks and greased the stringers with animal fat, tallow, and soft soap, which convinces McLeod even more that they are in retreat. So we've got to figure a way to get across the bridge and fast.
And he gives the war cry, for King George and broadswords, and the bagpipes fire up, and he's got this cadre of about 50 shock troops, 50 guys with those claymores, and they go rushing towards the bridge. And they get there, it's this grand Gaelic charge, right? And they get to the bridge, and they stop.
And they cross the bridge by plunging the points of the swords into the stringers, and then gingerly shuffle their way.
And now they're using those claymores to find purchase on those runners as they make their way across.
They eventually get at least 50 men across, maybe more, but they get at least 50. They get the 50 men across, and Lieutenant Colonel McLeod is one of the men across, and he's going to lead a charge up this causeway. At this point, we believe the Loyalists think that there's just a rear guard, if you will, maybe just up ahead of them. They don't realize that all 1,000 Patriots have taken up position across this bridge.
And these guys start down the causeway, and they come running up, claymores a-waving and everything, their battle cries going in the background. You've got swirling bagpipes and more guys trying to make their way across. And they get all the way up here into this shallow bowl right in front of the Patriot earthworks.
Again, thinking he's got Caswell's men on the run. And the next thing that they hear is men rising up and the clanking of equipment and the cocking of muskets and the barking of orders by officers.
Take aim! Fire!
And then just this explosion, this sheet of flames.
And Donald McLeod and his Highland charge ceased to exist. They were shredded right in front of the earthworks.
So why does the story of the Battle of Moore's Creek Bridge matter? What can we learn from it? What's the significance now to American and North Carolina history?
The significance of the Battle of Moore's Creek Bridge is really it's the first American victory over the British in battle. Granted, it's not exactly regulars versus regulars, but it's still that important first step.
This is about the birth of America. We defend our liberties and our freedom.
Before they were heroes, they were just people. They were farmers, they were blacksmiths, they were clerks down on the wharf in Wilmington that had things that they cared about. And when they felt that the overarching power of government had come into their lives and had become too oppressive, they stood up to it.
Without the Battle of Moore's Creek Bridge, North Carolina could have gone back under royal control.
And then that would have sparked an inland invasion of North Carolina, where they probably would have gone up to Cross Creek, which is now modern-day Fayetteville. They probably would have retaken New Bern, and they would have reestablished the royal government within North Carolina and isolated the southern colonies, which meant a lot of supplies and men never would have reached Washington's army in Boston and then in New York.
All of the leading Revolutionary War scholars dismiss, ignore, don't mention Moore's Creek, or if they do, they just don't pay much, never mind. It's an incredibly important battle, particularly for North Carolina, but for the country too.
And more importantly, it is the act and the event that entices North Carolinians to tell the Continental Congress that, yes, we want independence. And that's going to be a direct result is the Halifax Resolves.
Now the question is, do we still have that fire within us? Are we still concerned about liberty in the same way that our forefathers were? Or is it something that we're going to let tyranny slowly erode into our lives over time? And I think that's the real question of the American experiment, in North Carolina being one of the original 13 states. How much freedom are we willing to live with, and how much freedom do we want in our personal lives?